I'm 81 years old, and there's one conversation I avoided for 40 years, not because I didn't know it was important, not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid of what might happen if I finally said it out loud. I told myself there would be a better time, a calmer moment, a day when the words would come easier. That day never came. Instead, years passed, then decades, and the silence grew heavier than the truth ever would have been. There were so many chances, so many ordinary moments where I could have spoken, but I didn't. And now, looking back, I understand something I didn't then. Some conversations don't disappear when you avoid them. They wait. And they follow you all the way to the end of your life. Before I continue, I want to say something clearly. Today, I'm not sharing an easy story. I'm sharing an honest one, not to accuse anyone, not to reopen old wounds, but because this truth stayed unspoken for far too long. My name is David. I'm 81 years old, and for most of my life, I believed something that felt reasonable at the time. I believed that some conversations were better avoided. I believed saying certain things would only make life harder, that bringing up the past would create conflict, that silence, in its own way, could protect the people you love. That's what I told myself. I grew up in a family where difficult conversations didn't happen. You didn't sit down and explain how you felt. You didn't admit fear or regret. You kept going. If something hurt, you carried it quietly. If something felt unfinished, you learned to live with it. So when there was something important I needed to say to someone I loved, something heavy, something honest, I waited. I believed the right moment would come, a calmer day, a better mood. A time when the words wouldn't feel so dangerous. I told myself not now, then later became someday, and someday slowly turned into years. At the time, that belief felt mature, responsible even. Looking back now, I can see it for what it really was. Fear disguised as patience. Life didn't pause because I stayed silent. It moved on. Days filled up with ordinary things, work, responsibilities, routines that made the weeks feel shorter than they were. The person I needed to talk to was still there. We still saw each other, we still spoke. On the surface, nothing looked broken. We talked about practical things, schedules, plans, small updates that didn't require much emotion. And every time the conversation drifted close to what I wanted to say, I pulled it back. I told myself, this isn't the right moment. They look tired. This can wait. So I waited. Years passed like that. Holidays came and went. Birthdays were acknowledged. Life events happened. And every time something important occurred, the unsaid words felt heavier. Sometimes, late at night, I would rehearse the conversation in my head. I'd imagine how I might begin, what I'd say first, how I'd explain myself. But when morning came, the courage faded. It always seemed easier to keep things as they were than to risk changing them. And slowly, without any decision being made, silence became part of the relationship. Not an obvious silence, not an angry one, just the quiet understanding that certain things would never be discussed. At the time, I thought that was peace. I didn't realize it was distance quietly taking root. Over time, the silence started to change the way things felt. Not suddenly, not dramatically, just enough that I noticed it and chose not to look too closely. The conversations became shorter, more careful. We talked, but we stayed on safe ground. Things that didn't ask for honesty, things that didn't require risk. I noticed pauses where there hadn't been pauses before, moments where it felt like something wanted to be said and then wasn't. Sometimes I'd feel it right there, sitting between us. The words I'd carried for years, the conversation I kept postponing, and every time I'd tell myself the same thing: now isn't the right moment. I convinced myself that bringing it up would only complicate things, that it might hurt them, that it might hurt me, so I kept choosing quiet. But quiet has a way of shaping relationships. Eye contact didn't last as long. Laughter came quicker and faded faster. I started noticing how easily we moved around the important parts, how naturally we avoided them. And the longer I waited, the heavier the conversation became. It wasn't just something I hadn't said anymore. It became something I couldn't say, because after enough years, silence starts to feel permanent, like breaking it would change everything. So I told myself this was just how things were now, acceptable, manageable, but deep down I knew something had shifted. And I also knew I was the one who had let it happen. The moment didn't come the way I always imagined it would. There was no dramatic confrontation, no raised voices, no clear opening where the words finally found their place. Instead, it came quietly. I got a phone call one afternoon. Simple, brief. Something had happened. Something I had always assumed there would be time to talk about suddenly had an ending. I remember hanging up the phone and sitting there, staring at nothing, realizing the conversation I'd avoided for decades no longer had a place to land. The person I needed to talk to was still alive, but the moment had passed. What I didn't understand for a long time is that timing doesn't wait for courage. I thought silence kept things stable. I thought avoiding pain prevented damage. But in that moment, it became painfully clear. Silence doesn't preserve relationships, it freezes them. And frozen things don't grow. I replayed every near miss in my mind, every time I almost spoke, every time I swallowed the truth and chose comfort instead. And I realized something that still weighs on me. There are conversations you don't get a second chance to have. Not because someone leaves, but because the relationship quietly moves past the point where honesty fits. By the time I was ready to speak, the space for those words was already gone. It took me a long time to understand what I had actually been avoiding. It wasn't the conversation itself. It was vulnerability. I was afraid of saying something that couldn't be taken back, afraid of admitting regret, afraid of hearing an answer I wasn't prepared for. So I told myself silence was safer. What I didn't realize was that by staying quiet, I was still choosing an outcome. Avoiding the conversation didn't protect the relationship. It defined it. The distance I felt later wasn't sudden. It was built, year by year, by everything I didn't say. I had mistaken peace for connection. I had confused the absence of conflict with closeness, and I finally saw the truth. Some conversations don't exist to fix things. They exist to honor them, to acknowledge what mattered, to say, this was real, you were important to me. By avoiding that one conversation for 40 years, I didn't avoid pain. I postponed it, and when it finally arrived, it was heavier than it ever needed to be. I want to be clear about this. This isn't a story about someone else failing me. It's not about bad timing or circumstances. This is about the choices I made. No one stopped me from speaking. No one told me to stay quiet. I chose silence because it felt safer, because it allowed me to avoid discomfort, because it let me believe I was keeping the peace. But what I was really doing was protecting myself. I didn't want to look foolish. I didn't want to admit I was wrong. I didn't want to risk changing how the other person saw me. So I stayed quiet and called it patience. I can see now how unfair that was. By avoiding the conversation, I left the other person to fill in the gaps on their own. I let distance grow without ever explaining why. I denied them honesty because I was afraid of vulnerability, and that responsibility is mine. Not theirs. They didn't pull away out of cruelty. They adapted to the silence I created. And once I understand that, there's no one else to blame. The hardest part of this realization isn't regret. It's knowing that courage, delayed long enough, turns into something you can't use anymore. If you're listening to this, and there's a conversation you've been putting off, I want you to hear me. Don't wait the way I did. If there's something important sitting in your chest right now, something you keep telling yourself you'll say someday, pay attention to that. Silence doesn't make difficult conversations disappear. It just makes them heavier. Ask yourself why you're waiting. Are you protecting the other person, or are you protecting yourself from discomfort? Because there's a difference. If you're holding back because you don't want to hurt someone, speak gently. If you're holding back because you're afraid of how you'll be seen, be honest. Most relationships don't break because of one hard conversation. They weaken because of all the honest ones that never happen. You don't need the perfect moment. You don't need the perfect words. You just need courage sooner than comfort. Say the thing that matters while there's still time for it to matter. If you're wondering what to do after hearing this, let me make it simple. You don't need a speech. You don't need to explain everything at once. Start small. Say the thing you've been avoiding, even if it comes out imperfectly. Especially if it does. Begin with honesty, not justification. I've been meaning to talk to you. I should have said this a long time ago. I was afraid, and I stayed quiet. Let the other person respond without rushing to defend yourself, without correcting how they feel, without trying to control where the conversation goes. If the moment feels heavy, let it be heavy. That weight means it matters. And if you've waited years like I did, understand this. You may not get the outcome you hope for, but you will get something better than silence. Clarity. Speak while there's still room for the words to land, because once silence becomes permanent, no amount of regret can change it. I'm 81 years old now. Time feels different at this stage of life. It doesn't rush you anymore, it just waits. You become more aware of what's behind you than what's ahead, of conversations you did have and the ones you never did. I don't know how many chances I still have to speak honestly with the people I care about. I don't know how many ordinary days are left where a simple conversation could still change something. But I do know this. Avoiding the truth never saved me any time. It only made the years feel heavier when I finally looked back. Silence doesn't fade with age. It accumulates. And if I could change one thing about the way I lived my life, it wouldn't be the mistakes I made. It would be the words I kept to myself, thinking there would always be more time to say them. If this story stayed with you, I hope you'll take a moment before moving on. And if you know someone who's been avoiding an important conversation, someone who keeps telling themselves they'll say it later, please like this video. It helps these stories reach people before silence becomes permanent. I'd really like to hear from you as well. Leave a comment and tell me, Is there a conversation you've been putting off, or one you wish you'd had sooner? This channel is called Learn Before Regret for a reason. These stories aren't meant to scare you. They're meant to remind you that time doesn't wait for courage. If you want more honest reflections like this, please subscribe. I'll keep sharing what life teaches us while there's still time to learn it the easier way. We don't get forever, but we do get now. Thank you for listening.